good morning, everyone here in the room with us and online. Welcome to this session where we ask, can science anticipation help build a safer world? I'm joined today by Beatrice Fihn. Beatrice is the director of LEX International and the former director of the International Coalition Against Nuclear Weapons, the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And you can find out more about Beatrice on the GESDA app, her bio, and also the rest of the program. Anything else I need to say? No. Oh, yes. You can join the conversation on social media following the hashtag GESDA Summit. That's it, I think. So Beatrice, we're here. Hi. Thanks so much for being here with us today. We're here at the GESDA Summit, a summit on science anticipation. And you have worked tirelessly for years on trying to contain some of the existential risks that are a direct result of scientific discovery, nuclear weapons. So how do you think about the interplay between science and tech and building a safer world?
Yeah, thanks so much, Federica. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I think this is an incredibly important conversation to have right now, and I think in particularly as we're, not only confronted with anticipating the next kind of scientific innovations, but also grappling with old inventions like nuclear weapons, current ones like AI, for example, how it's going to impact the world. So it feels like we're in a place in the world right now where things are moving quite fast. So I think, science and technology is, incredible tools that are really furthering our world, can help make the world a better place. But of course, a lot of these things can also be used for harm and weaponized. You mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize, Alfred Nobel invented dynamite, a massive breakthrough in being able to do construction work and these kind of things, but can also be used, of course, to weapons. The atom was split. Humanity took like a whole leap forward here in CERN, was of course part of that, but you can also create it into a weapon of mass destruction. And I think that we're seeing that more and more, that we have to, as we are developing new technologies and really trying to maximize their potential for benefit of humankind, I think we also have this concern amongst people that they are also going to be used for harm. And sometimes that's also out of the hands of scientists. You will have scientists achieve, incredible breakthrough, and then authoritarian government or a democratic government too, for that matter, can take that technology, weaponize it, use it for harm, or non-state actors can use it for harm. So I think it really is, we have to think very carefully now as we're moving forward in a very fast-paced world with a lot of new development. Sort of how do we create structures and systems for conversations and work to kind of mitigate worst-case scenarios, try to channel the technology and the scientific innovation into things that will benefit the maximum amount of people. And in particularly, kind of also to create trust in technology. We've seen when things move very fast, we also see that people can feel a bit left behind. I just think there's a massive difference with like 15 years ago when you talk about new tech, there was an excitement and kind of like, oh, the world is going to be a better place because of this. And today you have almost like, oh, another thing, more stuff, and people are a little bit skeptical. And I think it's because people don't feel involved, they don't feel that they're participating or that they can be an actor in these things. So I really do think that we have to think about very carefully how do we involve people in these things, and how do we work together with different communities, scientists, politicians, civil society, as I represent, to really make sure that it is used for good, and we kind of limit the downside of these things, or limit potential harm, in order to maximize the benefits of them.
Yeah, thanks. And this is, of course, part of what GESDA tries to do, to bring together diplomats, people from the private sector, civil society, scientists, of course. And another thing, as you know, just as really focused on, is this idea of anticipating and anticipating developments. I wonder whether you could speak a little bit to what we've learned from efforts in the past decade or so on anticipating the impact of certain weapons. And I'm thinking in particular of AI-powered weapons or laws, lethal autonomous weapons. What have we learned from those efforts that we can bring into the conversation today about anticipating to create a safer world?
Yeah, it's very easy to be very negative about where we are in the world today. And when you people don't open newspapers anymore. People open their phones, their apps. When you look at media, what's being written, what happened, what's happening in the world, you can feel really kind of demoralized. But I do think that we're not as bad as humanity as we think we are sometimes. I think we are actually really learning from the past. For example, nuclear weapons were developed in the 1940s, and there wasn't really a huge amount of opposition. There was not a lot of public involvement in that. You had people like Einstein and Russell, of course, writing the first petition against nuclear weapons, but it kind of took quite a long time before the public was really aware of what happened. They weren't really anticipating sort of in that way. But now we move forward to, for example, AI weapons, which has been on the international community's radar for over a decade before and we really tried to make efforts to prevent the kind of weaponization and like the worst case scenario of these technologies before it happens. Now, we haven't succeeded, and that can feel very frustrating that we have not yet put in place regulations or a new treaty that controls these kind of weapons before they are in place. And we're just right now, I mean, it's a bit of a gray zone. What's an autonomous weapon? What's an AI weapon and what is not? What's a drone? How much AI needs to be involved in order for it to be classified as an AI weapon? But we are crossing that line very soon, if we haven't already, that these kind of weapons are now on the battlefield. We've seen in Gaza, for example, we see in Ukraine, these kind of weapons are highly automated being used. But so you can see it in a negative way, sort of like we haven't yet managed to regulate them before they're being placed. But at the same time, we have had conversations around this for 10 years. We have pushed governments. There's been kind of initiatives. There's been conversations with the companies that are developing these things. But there is a whole other awareness around potential dangers of autonomous weapons and efforts to try to rein in this thing before it becomes sort of uncontrollably released. To a much higher extent than we did with nuclear weapons or other weapons in the past. So I think that there is, it's not perfect. We're not good enough yet. But you can sort of see that as an international community, we are actually trying to anticipate and trying to act before. Now, it's also a little bit of human nature to not really get our act together until it really happens. I mean, that's true in our personal life. We know what we should be doing. We don't go to the gym enough. We don't eat properly enough. We don't sleep enough, And then once something happens, once our health is really, in a crisis, then we've made those changes. So I think it's kind of, I don't think we're ever going to be perfect and just anticipate and prevent terrible things immediately. But I think we can constantly do better. So on autonomous weapons, I think it's one of those huge challenges. And for me, it's not just a question of the weapon per se, but it's also a fundamental line that we're about to cross in humanity with artificial intelligence. There are so many different ethical perspectives and consequences of AI and how it's going to impact our world. But are we going to let this technology decide who lives and dies? I think for me, that's one of the fundamental principles that we have to really get our act together and make a decision and put some principles down in the international community if we're going to survive as a species. It's really a kind of ethical line that we shouldn't let this technology decide to kill people or not.
And for the audience, in case some people don't know, so lethal autonomous weapons are weapons who can basically decide on a target and pull the trigger without human involvement, without a human in the loop, on the loop. There's a lot of terminology about this, but it's basically delegating life and death decisions to a machine. And that's what the whole campaign, the whole Stop Killer Robots campaign as well, has been very involved in trying to limit. But I'm also glad to hear you say, Bea, in a way, that we're on an upward trajectory, which is important probably to sort of remember that it is possible to do better than our predecessors, and we have to. So that's part of what we're hoping to do today. One thing we discussed a bit, and I see it linked to this topic, is what we together called the fiction of frictionless change. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that in the context of, for example, lethal autonomous weapons or more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's and just to continue a little bit, like to anchor it to the previous conversation. So sort of, I think we want to prevent future threats and future sort of crises, and we want to anticipate. I think it's really hard to do that well in advance, not just because of sort of human nature, you postpone, but also there's so many current threats. And it can feel sometimes a little bit difficult to ask governments and people to devote attention and resources to something that has not yet happened when we have so many urgent crises right now. So there's always this kind of balance between anticipating future threats and kind of also kind of run the risk of just talking theories and talking future things when there's so much suffering and devastation happening right now. So we have to balance this kind of prevention and anticipation with also addressing what is currently happening. And we need to make sure that we don't only jump on the new cool innovation. Especially on the weapons field, it's very easy to sort of talk about future weapons and this is going to happen in the future. People are dying right now, and that needs to be stopped, and that needs to be getting enough political attention as well. So there's always this kind of friction and a little bit of tension between trying to do the next things and preemptively work on addressing threats, but also not forget the existing things that are happening right now. And then in terms of sort of how are we solving these problems, I think we have to also accept that things aren't going to be, we aren't going to solve things in a perfect way. We aren't going to solve things in a neat, tidy package that everyone agrees with. There's a lot of different interests on these issues. I know, for example, for a lot of companies that are driving innovation, they want no regulation at all. And they think that that is kind of preventing the good side, and they want to be able to move fast and really kind of put all of their resources they can as soon as possible. And then you have legislators that might want to legislate, of course, but that are moving quite slow, might not also always have the full information that maybe the corporate world, the private sector has, or the resources that the private sector has in order to do this. And might struggle to keep up with innovations in terms of legislation. And then you have, for example, civil society that can come across as very kind of risk-averse in new technology. We kind of want to make sure that we regulate things quickly first, be very safe. We need to test it for a long time, and don't just go ahead and do things. And I think this kind of friction between different interests doesn't have to be a problem. I think we need to push each other, and I think that's something that I'm thinking about in general in society right now. That it's like we're expecting everyone to agree and everyone to come up with this solution that just everyone will back, and that's not really how solutions work. It's always a little bit of back and forth and pushing every actor a little bit out of their comfort zone, and that's what compromise and really trying to get to agreements is to, maybe I'm not getting everything that I want, and maybe we're getting a little bit only, and maybe it's not good enough, but it's part of this kind of work of bringing all of society and all different parts of society with you on a kind of approach to things. So I think that when we come to this, we shouldn't shy away from the challenges in this, and that we might come at these issues from different perspectives, I think we should actually invite that and kind of sit with this slight discomfort of a bit of friction between different perspectives. That yes, there's going to be a private sector that is going to be against regulation, and yes, there's going to be actors that wants to overregulate maybe. And we are going to have to listen to both perspectives and kind of see where there's space to maneuver in those fields.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. One thing we discussed is sort of the concern that as we sort of go deeper into our own echo chambers, technological echo chambers, as we sort of interact with, say, ChatGPT, which always agrees with you, our sort of tolerance to discomfort, to disagreement is really diminishing. And that's probably something to lean into a little bit more, because there's no way around it, really. So you talked about compromise, you talked about bringing different perspectives together. That's a very Swiss thing, a very Swiss tradition of seeking compromise, dialoguing across, different parties and different languages, etc. We're here in Geneva. I was wondering, maybe to finish, whether you could say a little bit about how and where do you see actors in this ecosystem of Geneva, in Switzerland, with this tradition? How do you see them playing a role today in this field? Do you think there's something helpful about being here, perhaps, as opposed to, for instance, New York, but it could be somewhere else? Is there something? Is there a link here to perhaps the DNA of Geneva?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we kind of. We have such a long list of massive challenges in the world right now. There's, of course, the geopolitical situation with wars that are happening right now. There's climate change. You have things like AI, for example, increasing inequality and these filter bubbles. Really like a polarized world, and kind of seeing that polarization increasing. So I think that we have to remember that there's not one solution to any of these problems. There's going to be a multitude of solutions. I'm always very reluctant to people who say, like, this is what we have to do and this is the solution, because we're going to have to do so many different things to solve the problems that we're facing right now as a world. And we're going to also need a very wide range of actors. This is not just for politicians, this is not just for scientists, it's not just for the private sector, it's not just for individual activists, for example. This is something that we're going to have a wide range of actors working on a wide range of methods and approaches in order to make any progress. But one thing that I do think is really, really important is to build coalitions and build sort of networks of these diverse actors to work together. And I think in particularly scientists have a huge role to play in shaping the world. And we've seen, for example, during the Cold War that Russian and American scientists worked really well together and could actually do a really interesting initiative that built confidence, that built trust across these two blocks. And today, when we see a very kind of increasing polarization, I think science, and of course we do have a problem with people not believing in science in the same way, or people thinking that they know better because they have watched a YouTube film about it or something like that. So that's also a massive issue. But I think scientists working with facts, working with evidence is still really, really important. It's more important than ever. I think we have to think about how we communicate those things and how we involve the public in these processes in order to build trust in the science. But I do think that it's a way to meet different communities around the world through science. So I think that's something that I think is extremely important, that we have to continue. And I think in particularly opening up for very diverse coalitions, very diverse actors. I think Geneva and Switzerland particularly is a really great location for that. I mean, we have things like CERN, where we are. We have the United Nations. We have also a big private sector and a pharmaceutical sector, for example, a biochemistry sector. We have a financial sector. And I think there's this scope to really work together with all of these different types of actors here in a way that perhaps is harder in other locations. But I also think that we have to make sure that this doesn't become a bubble, that you really invite other parts of the world in, that there's the communities that are not represented here also get to be part of this location.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for a few questions. So I think there should be a roaming microphone. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Yeah. And perhaps we'll group a few questions and then you can answer them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this very inspiring talk. I was just wondering, Beatrice, you said that you pulled some strings to push governments. I was wondering if you can tell us at least one strategy that worked well, in your opinion, and maybe one strategy that did not.
Okay. I can't see very well, so please just give the mic to whoever has their hand up.
Thank you. I was wondering whether you have any sympathy with the view that the very existence of autonomous weapons means that governments feel obliged to use them because otherwise they are putting their own personnel, their own civilians and citizens in harm's way.
Perhaps a third question? Someone had their hand up, Ella? Yeah, to the front.
I was really curious about, you talked about compromise, and I'm curious, in this very polarized world that you mentioned, what are some ways we can build political will to compromise in these diverse groups and the diverse actors that are needed to solve today's problems?
Thanks. So, coalitions, laws, compromise. Easy topics.
Easy topics. In terms of government strategy, I think, having been working with different weapons issues in very difficult contexts, I think one of the key things to remember when working to convince governments about different pathways forward is to remember that they're still, governments are massive entities, but at the end of the day, it's still humans in there. And there are human people sitting on the different positions. And one of the things that I've been really amazed by is how much individuals in governments can actually shape policy and direction in that. I mean, of course, you have democratic processes like parliaments and elections that will set a direction and kind of pathways. But at the end of the day, even those things, there's a really key actors in political parties, in governments, in these kind of decision-making bodies that can have a lot of influence. And building networks with them and being able to identify people within these bigger structures that want to do something, that are interested, that want to achieve something, I think has been a really good strategy. And to work closely and build sort of trust between different actors. I mean, I can be in a very opposite position as a government, most governments on most issues. I don't think anyone is doing enough these days. But at the same time, kind of building a long-term relationship where you can you can be critical of it, but both actors still understanding the different roles that we play. As civil society, our role is to complain and say that's not good enough, you have to do more. And for governments, their role is to bring this whole structure along with them that is very unwieldy and can take time and is really complicated and have a lot of interests that they have to navigate. And I'm not saying that we as civil society, in our role, that we should accept that and give them an easy time, but more sort of having this understanding that it's going to take time and it's going to be kind of challenging and difficult. So that's one of the things that I feel has been a really effective strategy. Also to try to build with the support that you have. It's very easy to look at the problem states. And like, for example, on the nuclear weapons issue, that is China, US, Russia, UK, France, right? The countries with nuclear weapons, North Korea, Israel, India, and Pakistan. And almost feel like we have to start with them. But I think building also support where you already have support, building sort of a momentum and agency and kind of a movement around the people that are already supporting you is just as important, and actually is kind of a pick the low-hanging fruits first, kind of get going and build momentum and build a coalition of actors that can help you address the harder problems later on. So I think that's also one of the things. So I would say that a strategy that hasn't worked is to basically only focus on the most difficult actors and almost give them a veto over if your work succeeds or not. I think that's not a very, if you kind of, I was at a conference last week where people were saying like, well, the only two people who can do something about AI, for example, is Trump and Xi. And it kind of sets up the whole world for failure. If, I don't have them in my phone, I can't call them and just convince them tonight, right? So if we frame it around that only those two men can do anything about this problem, then it feels pretty hopeless, and you're going to get a very kind of uninspired work in that way. So trying to, I don't think it's very helpful to only focus on the hardest targets and the most difficult challenge only. We need to remember that that's where we want to get to in the end. So we don't give up on that and create all this like other types of work only. But I think we have to kind of balance it. Speaking of end, I think we're going to, if you'd like to address the other questions, we're going to have a few minutes left. Yeah. And then on the autonomous weapons, AI weapons, it's quite fascinating to me to see how, we kind of have an automatic instinct with weapons that only the same weapon can fight this weapon. So if someone has nuclear weapons, only nuclear weapons are sort of an opponent to that. If we have autonomous weapons, only autonomous weapons can fight another autonomous weapons, but that's not really true. Like, you don't need an autonomous weapon to shoot down an autonomous weapon. So we have this kind of mindset that we have to match our opponent and do exactly like, if they are violating international humanitarian law, we have to violate international humanitarian law, even though that might not actually be the best security strategy for us. So I think it's really important to look very realistically at AI weapons. They're not magical. AI is not flawless. If you ever use ChatGPT, you know that it's not always great, and sometimes it does things that you don't really understand. It's also a recipe for the military to lose control over its own weapons. They won't be able to control their own weapons, which I think is not a great place for your defense forces to be in. That they don't know why they're acting in a certain way or how they're acting or kind of being able to control. So I think there's so many weaknesses. I think we have to elevate that in the conversation, that we don't just think that this is high tech is better. You're already also seeing people developing these kind of different clothing, right? That will confuse cameras. Different, like it's not perhaps impossible to beat these weapons either. They're not that amazing. And in terms of the final question, we're running out of time. The conversation about political will. I think it's really, we have to have this kind of balance of being able to compromise, but also be very clear with what it is that we want. And I think that one of the things that why we're seeing so much distrust in politicians is that they don't feel very genuine sometimes, and they will sell everything that they do, every compromise they do as the best option, even if we know that that's not really, they get elected on a platform, then they do very little once they come in, but they're trying to kind of convince us that this is great, but we can see that it's not great. So I think we have to kind of encourage, in order to build both pressure on governments and pressure on politicians, and also that politicians get respect and trust from the public, we have to be a little bit more honest and a little bit more kind of clear. This is where we want to be. But it's going to take time. It's going to be difficult. And here's how we think that the steps could be built along the way. And along the way, we're going to have to compromise, because there's a lot of actors that don't want to go in the same direction, right? So how do we navigate this? So I think we have to be able to have much more of a genuine conversation about, I don't envy politicians today. It's really hard to make these kind of decisions with very competing interests. But I think we need to be able to have multitude of perspectives in a conversation.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, for your really rich insights. I'll take a stab at summarizing my takeaways from this conversation in case it's useful to anyone else. It probably won't do it justice, but here we go anyway. So the first is science and tech really are accelerating. Second, it's very important to both, of course, focus on further accelerating the positive applications of technology, but also to not lose sight that we need to mitigate the worst. Third, we've actually improved. That was very good news for me, from nuclear weapons to autonomous weapons to perhaps the next. We're on a, for now, positive trajectory in terms of our ability to anticipate what is coming. Fourth, there's very big questions around where we want to set the line between what humans can do and machines should be able to do, so around really morality and life and death decisions. Fifth, there's a tension between focusing on the sometimes overwhelming problems we have today versus the ones that are coming. And so there I would say what I find comforting is that anticipation creates some leeway for agency and action. Sixth, friction between different points of views is actually good. So let's lean into it a little bit more. 7, we need, linked to 6, many different perspectives to be able to find the right way forward. And Geneva is a good place to have different perspectives. 8, I can't even read my handwriting anymore. Okay, 8, we shouldn't lose track of the power of individuals to have things move within governments, within systems. So all of you, all of us, really have a role to play. And then perhaps finally, there's really a question around trust that you mentioned at the beginning, you came back to at the end. The way I would summarize is that honesty and a bit of clarity also about better information within society about the direction that science is taking, a better understanding of what this means will help build the trust that we need to bring everyone around the table to build the future. So thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for joining. Please, if there's a QR code on the screen, fill out the 1-minute feedback and enjoy the rest of the summit.